March 17, 1944. 23,000 feet above the industrial heart of Germany, where the morning sky stretched like a canvas painted in shades of steel and pewter. The air hung thin and bitter at this altitude, each breath a reminder of how far from Earth these young men had climbed in their aluminum machines. Lieutenant Robert "Dutch" Kellerman felt the familiar vibration of his P-51 Mustang's Merlin engine through his flight suit, a rhythmic heartbeat that had become as natural as his own pulse over these past months of escort duty with the 357th Fighter Group. Below, stretched across the horizon like a moving armada of silver specks, 300 B-17 flying fortresses of the 8th Air Force pressed eastward toward their target, the Messerschmitt production facilities at Augsburg. Each bomber carried 10 men, and a payload of destruction meant to cripple the Reich's ability to build the very fighters that now hunted them. The formation moved with mechanical precision, box after box of 4-engine bombers maintaining their defensive positions while contrails streamed behind them like the wake of ships crossing an ocean of. Kellerman adjusted his oxygen mask and scanned the horizon with the practiced eye of a pilot who had learned that survival depended on seeing death before it saw you. At 24, he possessed the weathered instincts of a man twice his age. The morning sun, still low on the eastern horizon, cast long shadows from the scattered cumulus clouds that dotted the sky like islands in an azure sea. These shadows, dark patches moving across the earth below, created a shifting mosaic of light and darkness that experienced pilots had learned to read like a map. The radio crackled with the calm professionalism that masked the tension every man felt. Bandits, 12 o'clock high, coming down fast. The voice belonged to Major Donald Botchke, leader of the 357th's mission that day. Kellerman's eyes snapped upward, following the invisible line that connected 12 o'clock on his cockpit to the space directly ahead. There, perhaps 5,000 feet above, and diving with the deadly grace of hunting hawks, came a dozen Messerschmitt Bf 109s. The German fighters descended from the sun, a tactical maneuver as old as aerial combat itself. Their angular silhouettes grew larger with each passing second, dark crosses on their wings becoming visible as they committed to their attack run. These were not the green recruits that had begun appearing in Luftwaffe cockpits as the war progressed. The precision of their formation, the calculated timing of their approach, spoke of veteran pilots who understood that this engagement would likely determine who would see another sunset. For Kellerman, this moment represented everything the Army Air Forces had trained him to expect, yet everything they could never fully prepare him for. The classroom lectures at flight school had spoken of aerial combat in terms of physics and ballistics, of turn rates and energy management, but they had never captured the primal fear that gripped a man's chest when death approached at 300 miles per hour, or the strange clarity that came when training and instinct merged into something beyond conscious thought. The German pilots had awakened that morning, believing they understood the nature of this war. They had studied the intelligence reports detailing American bomber formations, analyzed the escort patterns of P-51s and P-47s, calculated the mathematics of interception and engagement. What they expected was another methodical battle of attrition, where their superior knowledge of German airspace and their experienced gunnery would whittle down the American formations piece by piece. They had witnessed this dynamic play out dozens of times over the past months. American resolve meeting German expertise in a deadly algebra that favored the defender. But what Lieutenant Kellerman was about to demonstrate transcended the conventional wisdom of aerial warfare. As the Messerschmitts committed to their diving attack, he made a decision that would have seemed impossible to the German pilots who had spent years mastering the established principles of fighter combat. Instead of turning to meet the attack or diving to gain speed for evasion, Kellerman rolled his Mustang to the left and headed directly toward a massive cumulus cloud whose shadow stretched across several square miles of German countryside. The historical record shows that by March 1944, the balance of air superiority over Europe had begun shifting decisively toward the Allies. The arrival of the P-51 Mustang in significant numbers had extended the range of American fighter escorts to previously impossible distances. Where once German interceptors could attack unescorted bomber formations over their own territory, they now faced the prospect of engaging veteran American fighter pilots throughout the entire mission profile. Intelligence reports from captured Luftwaffe personnel revealed a growing awareness among German pilots that the war of attrition was turning against them. Yet, on this particular morning, Hauptmann Friedrich Müller, leading the attacking Messerschmitt formation, felt the familiar confidence that came from superior positioning and numerical advantage. At 28, Müller had scored 41 confirmed victories against Allied aircraft. His tactical understanding had been honed through 3 years of combat over the Western Front. As he watched the lone American P-51 break formation and head toward the cloud cover, Müller interpreted this as the predictable panic, response of an inexperienced pilot attempting to hide rather than fight. What Müller could not have anticipated was that Kellerman possessed an intuitive understanding of how cloud shadows could be used not merely as concealment, but as weapons of misdirection. The American pilot had spent countless hours studying the interplay between sunlight, clouds, and visibility during his training flights over the English countryside. He had observed how shadows moving across the landscape could create optical illusions, how the contrast between bright sunlight and sudden darkness could temporarily disorient even experienced aviators. As Kellerman's Mustang disappeared into the cloud mass, the German fighters split into 2 elements, intending to bracket the cloud and catch the American as he emerged. This was standard intercept doctrine, proven effective countless times against Allied pilots who used clouds for temporary refuge. Müller positioned 4 aircraft above the cloud, while directing his wingman and 6 additional fighters to circle below, creating an inescapable trap. But Kellerman had no intention of simply hiding within the cloud and hoping to escape detection. The meteorological conditions that morning had created a perfect alignment of atmospheric elements, a layer of cumulus clouds at 18,000 feet, strong sunlight from the east, and sufficient visibility below the cloud base to maintain visual reference with the ground. These conditions allowed for a type of aerial maneuvering that existed more in the realm of theoretical possibilities than practical application. The historical documentation from the 357th Fighter Group's mission reports indicates that cloud flying in 1944 remained a dangerous proposition, even for experienced pilots. The lack of reliable instrument flying aids meant that entering clouds often resulted in spatial disorientation, loss of altitude control, or collision with other aircraft attempting similar maneuvers. Standard operating procedure called for fighters to avoid extended cloud penetration during combat situations. Yet Kellerman possessed an innate ability to maintain spatial orientation through instrument reference while simultaneously calculating the movement patterns of multiple enemy aircraft operating in clear air. Inside the cloud, surrounded by gray vapor that limited visibility to mere yards, Kellerman began executing a maneuver that would have been impossible without precise timing and an almost supernatural awareness of three-dimensional geometry. He reduced throttle to minimum cruise power, minimizing engine noise while maintaining just enough airspeed to retain control authority. Using his magnetic compass and artificial horizon, he began a gentle climbing turn that would bring him back toward the eastern edge of the cloud, but at an altitude 500 feet higher than his entry point. The German pilots, meanwhile, maintained their positions around the cloud perimeter, eyes straining to catch the first glimpse of the American fighter's emergence. Miller monitored his fuel consumption while calculating intercept angles for each possible exit point. His experience suggested that the American would emerge within 30 to 40 seconds, either fleeing toward the bomber formation or attempting to dive away toward friendly territory. What happened next challenged every assumption about aerial combat tactics that the German pilots had developed through years of successful operations. Kellerman emerged from the cloud's eastern edge at the precise moment when the cloud shadow was passing over the positions occupied by 4 of the German fighters. The contrast between the brilliant morning sunlight and the sudden darkness created by the cloud shadow produced a temporary but complete visual impairment for the Messerschmitt pilots. The physiological effects of rapid light-to-dark transition at high altitude had been documented in Luftwaffe medical reports, but never in the context of tactical exploitation. The human eye requires several seconds to adjust from bright sunlight to relative darkness, during which visual acuity drops to nearly zero. Kellerman had timed his emergence to exploit this precise moment of vulnerability, appearing like a phantom against the backdrop of shadow and sunlight. His Mustang burst from the cloud cover with the Merlin engine at full throttle, the distinctive howl of supercharged power cutting through the thin air. But instead of fleeing or engaging in conventional combat maneuvering, Kellerman executed a series of attacks that utilized the cloud shadow as both concealment and psychological weapon. He dove toward the 4 German fighters struggling to acquire visual contact in the sudden darkness, fired a burst that damaged one Messerschmitt's engine, then climbed back toward the cloud cover before the remaining aircraft could respond. The sound that would haunt the German pilots' memories was not the conventional noise of aerial combat, the rattle of machine guns or the scream of aircraft in steep dives. Instead, it was the eerily quiet whistle of Kellerman's Mustang as it ghosted through the shadow zones, appearing and disappearing like a predator that had mastered the art of using darkness as camouflage. The psychological impact proved as devastating as the physical damage inflicted by his guns. Contemporary accounts from debriefed German pilots describe the disorientation they experienced as their formation. Integrity collapsed under attacks that seemed to come from impossible angles. Müller, attempting to reorganize his scattered elements, found himself pursuing shadows and phantom contacts, while the real threat materialized from directions that defied tactical logic. The carefully planned intercept devolved into a chaotic series of individual engagements where the advantage of numerical superiority became meaningless. Kellerman's Mustang became a symbol of American adaptability in the face of established European combat doctrine. Where German pilots had learned to fight according to principles derived from years of continental warfare, American aviators brought an innovative flexibility that often turned conventional wisdom on its head. The abundance of training time available to American pilots before deployment overseas had allowed them to experiment with unconventional tactics that their German counterparts, pressed into immediate combat roles, had never explored. The technical specifications of the P-51 Mustang played a crucial role in enabling these unorthodox maneuvers. The aircraft's exceptional range came not just from its efficient engine and aerodynamic design, but from its structural integrity under high-stress maneuvering. While German fighters of 1944 suffered from material shortages that affected everything from fuel quality to control cable reliability, American aircraft represented the peak of industrial abundance. Every component in Kellerman's Mustang had been manufactured to tolerances that allowed for sustained high-performance operations under extreme conditions. As the engagement continued, the pattern of attack and evasion took on an almost hypnotic quality. Kellerman would disappear into a cloud, emerge from shadow zones to strike isolated German aircraft, then vanish again before coordinated retaliation could develop. The Messerschmitt pilots, trained to fight in formations where mutual support provided security, found themselves isolated and vulnerable to an opponent who had transformed the sky itself into an ally. The radio chatter from the German formation reflected growing frustration and confusion. Müller's attempts to coordinate attacks were hampered by the fact that his pilots could never predict where the American would appear next. Standard intercept procedures assumed that enemy aircraft would behave according to logical tactical principles. But Kellerman had moved beyond logic into a realm where instinct and environmental awareness combined to create something approaching art. By this point in the engagement, the broader bomber formation had continued its approach toward Augsburg, escorted by other elements of the 357th Fighter Group. But the drama playing out in the shadow-dappled sky above had taken on a significance that transcended the immediate tactical situation. What was occurring represented a fundamental shift in the nature of aerial warfare, from a contest of mechanical superiority to a demonstration of adaptive intelligence. The symbol that would later represent this transformation was not a weapon or piece of technology, but something as simple and abundant as sunlight filtered through water vapor. The cloud shadows that Kellerman used with such devastating effect represented the limitless resources available to American forces. Not just material abundance, but the intellectual freedom to reimagine the possibilities of combat. Where scarcity had forced German pilots to rely on proven methods, abundance had allowed Americans to explore innovative alternatives. Historical analysis of the engagement reveals that Kellerman's success stemmed not from superior firepower or mechanical advantage, but from his ability to perceive the sky as a three-dimensional environment where weather, light, and atmospheric conditions could be manipulated as tactical tools. This represented a distinctly American approach to warfare, the willingness to experiment with unconventional solutions when confronted with seemingly insurmountable challenges. The final moments of the engagement arrived when Müller, down to less than 10 minutes of fuel remaining, was forced to break off pursuit and lead his surviving aircraft back toward their home base. Of the 12 Messerschmitts that had begun the intercept, 2 had been shot down, 3 had sustained damage requiring immediate repair, and all had expended their ammunition in futile attempts to corner an opponent who refused to fight according to established rules. Kellerman's Mustang emerged from the cloud cover one final time, sunlight glinting off its polished aluminum skin as it rejoined the bomber escort formation. His fuel gauge showed sufficient reserves to complete the mission and return to base in England, a testament to the strategic planning that had made such long-range operations possible. The radio crackled with congratulations from fellow pilots who had witnessed portions of the engagement. But Kellerman himself remained focused on the fundamental responsibility that had brought him to this altitude above Germany. The bombers continued their approach toward Augsburg, their formation intact, and their morale bolstered by the knowledge that American fighters could not only match German pilots in skill and courage, but could exceed them in adaptability and innovation. The psychological impact of Kellerman's performance rippled through both formations. German pilots returning to base with stories of an enemy who seemed to command the very elements, and American crews witnessing proof that individual initiative could overcome numerical disadvantage. Post-mission intelligence reports would later reveal that the engagement had been observed by Luftwaffe ground controllers who struggled to understand the tactical sequence they had witnessed on their radar screens. The conventional patterns of aerial combat, pursuit, engagement, disengagement, had been replaced by something that resembled a deadly game of hide-and-seek played in 3 dimensions. German tactical manuals contained no procedures for countering an opponent who used weather phenomena as weapons. The broader strategic implications became apparent in subsequent missions over German territory. Word of Kellerman's success spread through both air forces, inspiring American pilots to experiment with similar environmental tactics, while causing German commanders to question the reliability of their established intercept procedures. The psychological warfare aspect proved as significant as the immediate tactical victory. In the months that followed, American fighter pilots began incorporating cloud shadow tactics into their standard operating procedures. Training programs in England included sessions on meteorological warfare, teaching pilots to read cloud formations and light conditions as carefully as they studied enemy aircraft recognition charts. What had begun as one pilot's intuitive adaptation became part of the systematic approach that would ultimately ensure Allied air superiority over Europe. The transformation of Kellerman from a conventional escort pilot to a master of environmental warfare symbolized the broader evolution of American military thinking during the final years of World War II, where European combat doctrine had been shaped by centuries of territorial warfare and resource limitations. American pilots brought a frontier mentality that viewed every challenge as an opportunity for innovation rather than an obstacle to be endured. The industrial abundance that made such experimentation possible extended far beyond the production of aircraft and weapons. American pilots arrived in the European theater with hundreds of hours of training flight time, allowing them to develop instinctive responses to unusual situations. German pilots of 1944, by contrast, often entered combat with minimal preparation due to fuel shortages and accelerated training programs, necessitated by mounting losses. This disparity in preparation time allowed American aviators to explore the theoretical limits of their aircraft and their own capabilities. Kellerman's use of cloud shadows represented the culmination of countless hours spent studying the interaction between light, atmosphere, and metal. Knowledge that could only be acquired through extensive experimentation. During peacetime training conditions, the sound that came to symbolize American air power was not the roar of engines or the thunder of guns, but the whisper-quiet approach of aircraft that had learned to use stealth and misdirection as weapons. This acoustic signature, the barely audible presence that preceded devastating attacks, became a source of psychological pressure for German pilots who could never be certain when death might emerge from an apparently empty sky. As autumn approached and the war moved toward its inevitable conclusion, the tactics pioneered during engagements like Kellerman's became standard elements of American fighter doctrine. The willingness to experiment with unconventional approaches had evolved into a systematic methodology for achieving air superiority through innovation, rather than attrition. The legacy of that March morning above Germany extended far beyond the immediate tactical victory. It represented proof that freedom of thought could triumph over rigid adherence to established doctrine, that abundance of resources could be transformed into abundance of possibilities, and that individual initiative could reshape the fundamental nature of warfare itself. In the end, Lieutenant Robert Kellerman returned to his base in England with a story that would be told and retold throughout the remaining months of the war. But more importantly, he had demonstrated that the American approach to aerial combat, flexible, innovative, and unbound by conventional limitations, represented not just a tactical advantage, but a philosophical revolution in the application of military power. The cloud shadows that had served as his allies on that distant morning would continue to move across the landscapes of Europe, but they would never again be seen as mere weather phenomena by the pilots who flew through them. They had become symbols of the endless possibilities that emerge when human ingenuity encounters the limitless resources of a free society, and when individual courage finds expression through technological mastery and tactical innovation. The sky above Germany would belong to America, not through superior numbers or mechanical advantage alone, but through the willingness to reimagine the very nature of aerial warfare. One shadow, one cloud, one impossible maneuver at a time.